Imagine the wide Pacific Ocean from far above. The water stretches in every direction, a vast blue plain that seems to have no end. Clouds drift across it in slow white spirals. The sun warms its surface. The wind brushes long, soft ripples across the waves. From this great height, you can travel for hours in your mind without seeing a single piece of land. The ocean simply keeps going, deeper and wider than anything you have ever known. Now imagine drifting slowly downward, the way a feather falls, the clouds part. The light shifts from pale silver to deep glowing blue. And there, sitting alone in all that water, you begin to see it, a small triangle of green and brown, a single island, no larger than a fingertip against the enormous sea. It is one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. The nearest other inhabited island lies more than 1,000 miles away. The nearest continent is even farther. From the air it looks like a tiny leaf that drifted out into the middle of the world and somehow stayed there. The people who live there call it Rapa Nui. Many others know it as Easter Island. It is a small place, only about 63 square miles, shaped like a rough triangle with old, sleeping volcanoes at each corner. Grasslands roll across its low hills. Cliffs of dark stone fall into the sea. Caves wind down into the earth. The wind blows almost without pause, carrying the smell of salt and warm grass. And scattered across the island, watching the land with calm stone faces, stand the Moai. Before we go further, the planet has a new quiet wonder to share every night. If you'd like one waiting for you each evening, subscribe and let it come to you. The Moai are giant carved figures, hundreds of them, shaped from soft volcanic rock. Some are short and squat. Some rise more than 30 feet into the air. Some weigh as much as a small house. They have long ears, heavy brows, and proud, unsmiling mouths. They face inland, mostly, gazing across the fields where people once lived. They have stood there for many centuries, weathered by wind and rain, lichens slowly painting their cheeks in soft greens and greys. And they hold, in their silence, one of the deepest mysteries on Earth. That mystery is not only how they were made. It is not only how they were moved across the island without wheels or large animals. The deeper question is about the people who made them. A society once thrived here, far from any other shore. They grew crops, sailed canoes, raised families, told stories, and carved these enormous stone ancestors with patience that is hard to imagine. Then, somewhere along the way, that society changed. The carving slowed. The forests thinned. The population dropped. By the time outside ships arrived in the 1700s, the island was a quieter place than it had once been. For a long time, one story dominated the way the world spoke about Rapa Nui. It was a story of self-inflicted collapse, a story of a people who, it was said, cut down their trees, used up their land, and brought ruin on themselves. It became a kind of warning, told around the world. But in recent decades, that story has begun to crack. New evidence, new digs, and new conversations with the Rapa Nui people themselves have raised serious doubts. Some researchers now wonder whether the collapse, as it was once described, ever truly happened in the way the old story claimed. Others think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, woven together from many strands. So the central question of this long, quiet night is simple to ask and very hard to answer. What really happened to the people of Rapa Nui? Was it something they did to their own home? Was it something done to them by outsiders who came later, bringing disease and ships that carried people away? Was it both, layered across generations in ways that no single tale can hold? The evidence is partial. The voices of the past speak in fragments, and the island itself, for all its beauty, keeps much of its story to itself. Tonight, we will sit with that question. We will walk slowly across the island in our minds. We will visit the quarry where the statues sleep half finished in the rock. We will follow the old roads, listen to the wind, and look at the soft, weathered faces of the Moai. We will not solve the mystery. We will only wonder at it, gently, the way the sea wonders at the shore. Before we sink any deeper into the mystery, let us steady ourselves with the simple shape of the place. The island we are wandering about is called Rapa Nui by the people whose ancestors first walked its slopes. On many maps, it carries another name, Easter Island, given by a Dutch sea captain who arrived on Easter Sunday in 1722. It sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, alone, with no other land in sight in any direction. To picture how alone it really is, imagine standing on its highest hill and looking outward. The nearest inhabited island, Pitcairn, lies more than 2,000 kilometers to the west. The nearest continental coast, the coast of Chile, sits more than 3,500 kilometers to the east. That is roughly the distance from New York to Los Angeles, but with nothing in between. No reef, no outpost, no passing ship lights at night, only deep, dark water. The island itself is small. It measures about 24 kilometers from one end to the other, and about 12 kilometers across at its widest point. You could walk its length in a long single day. Its total area is roughly 160 square kilometers, about the size of a modest city. If you placed it inside a place like Washington, D.C., it would tuck neatly within the borders, with a little room left over. The shape of Rapa Nui is a rough triangle. Each of its three corners is marked by an old volcano, now quiet, their craters softened by time and grass. The tallest, Teravaka, rises about 507 meters above the sea. That is roughly the height of a tall modern skyscraper, but spread out into a broad, gentle dome, rather than a sharp peak. The other two volcanoes, Poike and Ranokau, are lower and older, their slopes rolling down to cliffs that drop straight into the surf. The land itself was born from fire. Rapa Nui is the visible tip of a much larger underwater mountain, pushed up from the seafloor by volcanic activity over the past several million years. The youngest lava flows are perhaps only 100,000 years old, which sounds ancient, but is quite young in the long story of the planet. The rock under your feet, if you were standing there now, would be dark basalt, porous and rough, the kind of stone that holds the memory of cooling lava in every pore. Because the island is small and ringed by deep ocean, it has no real rivers. Rain falls, soaks quickly into the volcanic soil, and gathers in the three crater lakes that sit inside the old volcanoes. These freshwater pools, fringed with reeds, were the main standing water on the island. For a people living far from any other shore, those quiet crater lakes were precious. The climate is mild and steady. Temperatures usually sit between 15 and 28 degrees Celsius across the year, a soft range that rarely tips into true heat or true cold. Wind, though, is constant. The trade winds push across the open Pacific and break against the island's cliffs, bending the grass low and carrying salt deep inland. There are no tall trees standing in great forests today. The land is mostly open, rolling, golden green, with low shrubs and grasses combed by the wind. The first people are believed to have arrived by canoe, sometime between roughly 800 and 1200 years ago, though the exact date is still debated. They came from the wider Polynesian world to the west, part of the long, astonishing tradition of ocean voyaging that settled island across the Pacific. How they found this lonely speck, and how many boats made the crossing, remains an open question. Some researchers think a single founding voyage is most likely. Others suspect more than one wave of arrivals over the centuries. The famous statues, the Moai, came later, carved over a span of several hundred years by the descendants of those first voyagers. Nearly 1,000 of them are scattered across the island today, some standing, some fallen, some still half asleep in the rock of the quarry. They are made of a soft volcanic stone called tuff, and we will sit with their story in the sections to come. For now, hold this picture in your mind: a small green triangle of land, ringed by cliffs and surf, 3 old volcanoes resting at its corners, crater lakes catching the rain, wind moving constantly over the grass, and all around it, in every direction, a vast and patient ocean, stretching farther than the eye can see, hiding the rest of the world below the curve of the horizon. To understand the Moai, we have to walk back in time to a single mountain on the eastern side of the island. Its name is Rano Raku. It is a volcanic cone, soft and rounded, rising from the green grass like a sleeping animal. From a distance, it looks gentle. Up close, it is something else entirely. Its slopes are pocked with shapes, faces, shoulders, long stone bodies half buried in the earth. This is the place where the giants were born. Rano Raraku formed long before any human walked the island. It was built by ancient eruptions that left behind a special kind of rock called tuff. Tuff is volcanic ash that fell, settled, and slowly hardened over time. It is softer than granite. It is softer than basalt. A person with a stone tool, working patiently, can shape it, and that is exactly what the carvers did. The island holds many kinds of stone. There is hard black basalt along the coast. There is the red scoria of another small crater, which would later become the top knots. There is dense rock, used for fish hooks and adzes, but almost every Moai on the island, nearly 1,000 of them, came from this one mountain. The carvers knew what Rano Raku could give them. They returned to it again and again, across many generations. The shaping began directly on the cliff face. A team of workers would mark out the front of a statue first, the nose, the brow, the long ears, the folded hands resting low on the belly. They cut downward into the rock with hand tools made of harder stone, called toki. The toki wore down quickly. Broken ones lie scattered across the quarry to this day, like discarded pencils on a desk. Each Moai was carved lying on its back, still attached to the mountain along a thin keel of rock beneath its spine. The face was finished first, smoothed and detailed, while the body was still part of the cliff. Only when the front was nearly complete did the carvers begin to free the statue. They chipped along the keel, narrowing it until the great figure could be eased away from the rock that made it. How long did one Moai take? No one knows for certain. Some researchers think a single statue, of average size, may have taken a team of carvers a year or two of steady work. Larger ones would have taken much longer. The biggest Moai still in the quarry, a figure called El Gigante, is nearly 70 feet long. It was never finished. It lies on its back in the rock, staring up at the sky, waiting for hands that never returned. The tools themselves are part of the mystery. The carvers had no metal, no iron, no bronze. They worked with stone on stone, and yet they shaped faces of remarkable subtlety. The lips curve, the nostrils flare gently, the brow ridges cast soft shadows. Whoever made these statues had been making them for a long time, perfecting the craft across generations of teachers and apprentices. The mountain still holds the unfinished evidence of this work. Statues lie at every stage. Some are only faint outlines scratched into the rock and abandoned. Some are nearly complete, but still attached at the spine. Some are fully carved and standing in pits at the base of the mountain, as if waiting to be moved. There is no clear record of who decided which statues would be finished and which would be left. There is no record of why the work eventually stopped. One theory is that the carvers worked under the direction of clan leaders, each clan competing to produce ever larger and more impressive ancestors. Another idea is that the carving was a ritual act in itself, a sacred process tied to the spiritual life of the island, where the act of shaping the stone mattered as much as the finished figure. Both ideas may hold truth. Neither fully explains the sudden silence that fell over the quarry. Walk through Rano Raku today, and you walk through an interrupted workshop. Half-shaped faces emerge from the slopes. Tools lie where someone set them down. Patterns of work suggest people stepped away for a meal or a season and never came back to that particular stone. The mountain remembers the rhythm of their hands. It does not tell us why the rhythm ended. For tonight, it is enough to picture them, the slow tap of stone on stone, the dust drifting in the warm Pacific air, the slow emergence of a face from a mountain that had been waiting quietly for someone to find it. Tonight we sit with the stone itself. Before we follow the giants across the island, before we ask why they walked or why they fell, we should know what they are made of. The Moai are not just shapes, they are bodies of rock, born from old fires, shaped by old hands, and they carry inside them a story older than the island. Most of the Moai were carved from a soft volcanic stone called tuff. Tuff forms when a volcano erupts, ash and tiny bits of glass into the air, and those bits fall back to the ground and slowly weld together. Over thousands of years, the ash hardens into rock. It stays soft enough to carve with simple tools, yet strong enough to stand for centuries in the wind and rain. On Rapa Nui, this stone gathered in one place above all others, a crater called Rano Raraku. Rano Raraku is the sleeping quarry. It is the inner slope and outer flank of an old volcano on the eastern side of the island. The crater holds a small lake ringed by reeds, and the walls of the crater are made of that pale golden tuff. Almost every Moai on the island came from this one hillside. Nearly 1,000 of them. Some still lie inside the rock, half carved, as if the workers set down their tools one afternoon and never came back. The tuff itself is a kind of memory. Each grain in it was once airborne, glowing, falling from a sky full of fire. The volcano that made Rano Raraku is long quiet now, but its breath is still here, pressed into stone. When the carvers cut into the cliff, they were cutting into an old eruption. Every chip that fell from their blades was a piece of an ancient sky. The carving tools themselves were made of a harder stone called basalt. Basalt is dark, dense and heavy. It comes from lava that cooled quickly, locking its minerals tight. The island has plenty of it along the coast, and in old lava flows, the Rapa Nui-shaped basalt into handpicks called toki, and with these toki they slowly bit away at the softer tuff. Hard stone shaping soft stone. One volcanic gift used to free another. There is a third stone in this story, and it has its own color, the pukau. The round top knots that sat on the heads of many Moai were carved from a red rock called scoria. Scoria is full of tiny holes, like a frozen sponge. Those holes are bubbles of gas that were trapped in the lava as it cooled. Iron in the rock rusted over time and turned the surface a deep, dusky red. The pukau came from a different quarry on the other side of the island, a small crater called Puna Pau. We will sit with the pukau mystery in its own section. For now, Just hold the image. Pale gold bodies, red crowns, dark tools. All three of these stones were born from the same source. The Pacific seafloor here is a thin spot in Earth's crust, and far below the island, a column of hot rock rises slowly from the deeper mantle. Scientists call this a hot spot. The hot spot melted its way up through the ocean floor over millions of years and built a chain of underwater mountains. Rapa Nui is the tip of one of those mountains. The whole island, every cliff and every grain of tuff, is the cooled breath of that deep heat, and the heat itself is older still. The iron staining the pukao red, the minerals locked in the basalt, the silica in the soft tuff. These elements did not begin on Earth. They were forged inside ancient stars that lived and died long before our sun was born. When those stars collapsed, they scattered their atoms into space. Some of those atoms drifted into the cloud that became our solar system. Some of them became this small Pacific island. Some of them became the faces of the Moai. So when you picture a carver at Rano Raku, kneeling in the dust with a basalt pick in his hand, picture also the long road the stone has traveled, from a dying star, through a forming earth, up through a hot spot in the seafloor, into an eruption that fell as ash, into a crater that hardened over thousands of years, into the hands of a person who saw a face waiting inside. We still do not fully know who first cut into that cliff, or why so many Moai were left unfinished there. The quarry sleeps with its half-born giants. Tonight we let it sleep, and we listen. Stand on the soft grass of Rapa Nui at dusk, and you will notice something strange about the Moai. They do not look out to sea, they face inland. Their broad stone backs turn toward the waves, and their long carved eyes look across the fields and villages, watching the land where the people once lived. Almost every Moai on the island does this. Out of nearly 900 statues, only a small group at one site looks outward, and those few face a specific horizon for reasons still gently debated. The choice was not random. The choice was deliberate, repeated, and held steady across many generations. And it tells us something about the invisible forces the carvers believed in. Not gravity, not wind. Something quieter. Something the soft eyes of the stone were meant to gather and hold. Many researchers think the Moai represented honored ancestors. In Polynesian tradition, an ancestor spirit could carry a kind of power, often called mana. Mana was a gentle, invisible energy. It could bless a field. It could protect a family. It could make crops grow and children grow strong. By facing the statues inland, the people may have been placing the gaze of their ancestors directly over the gardens, the houses, and the daily life of the village. The land sat under a soft, watching presence, like sunlight that never moved. Other researchers point out that the statues stood on stone platforms called ahu, and these platforms often held the bones of the dead. So the Moai may have been more than symbols. They may have been markers of burial, lifted up tall so the ancestors could keep watch over their descendants. The gaze, in this view, was a kind of slow, lasting embrace. Now think about the physical forces these stones must have endured to keep that gaze. Each Moai weighs many tons. Some weigh as much as a small house. They stand on platforms built from carefully fitted stones, with no mortar between them. Gravity pulls them down at every moment. Wind from the Pacific pushes against their broad chests. The ground beneath the island shifts gently, since Rapa Nui sits on the remains of 3 old volcanoes. Salt air drifts in from every direction, slowly eating at the soft volcanic stone they were carved from. The carvers knew this. They cut the Moai with low centers of gravity, with wide bases with hips and bellies that push the weight downward. The statues are not slender, they are stout. They lean very slightly forward, so the line of their balance falls just inside their stone feet. A taller, thinner statue would have toppled in the first strong storm. The shape we see today is partly artistic, and partly a quiet answer to gravity itself. The volcanic tuff they were carved from is soft enough to shape with stone tools, but it is also fragile. Rain wears it down. Lichen creeps across its surface. Sun bleaches it. The faces that look so sharp in old photographs were once sharper still. Time has been smoothing them for centuries, the way a slow river smooths a pebble. Some scholars wonder how the Moai looked when they were new. Their cheeks would have been crisper, their lips firmer, their long noses bolder against the sky. There is another force at work here, harder to measure, but real. The force of belief. A society does not move stone giants across miles of rough ground unless something deeply important pulls them forward. Whatever the people of Rapa Nui felt about their ancestors, about mana, about the watching eyes, that feeling was strong enough to organize hundreds of years of labor. It shaped roads, quarries, villages, and the rhythm of the seasons. Belief, in a sense, became a kind of gravity of its own. It pulled the stone up out of the mountain. It pulled the people together around a shared task. We do not know exactly what the Moai meant to the carvers. We do not have their full words, only fragments of oral memory and a script we cannot yet read. We can only stand beside the statues now, in the soft evening light, and feel the weight of their inward gaze. The land they once watched has changed. The villages are gone. The gardens have softened back into grass. But the faces still turn the same way they always turned, toward the heart of the island, holding their slow vigil under the moving clouds. What they were truly meant to do, bless, protect, remember, contain, is part of the mystery we are sitting with tonight. Their long, patient eyes keep their answer to themselves. Picture, for a moment, a stone figure as tall as a two-story house. Now imagine it weighs as much as 10 large pickup trucks stacked together. That is one Moai, not the biggest one, just an average one. The typical Moai stands about 13 feet high and weighs around 14 tons. Some are smaller, the size of a tall person. Others are far larger, taller than a 4-story building, heavier than a fully loaded passenger jet. Now imagine moving that figure, not by truck, not by crane, by hand, by rope, by the slow patience of a small island community, and not just one of them. Nearly 900, that is the number of Moai, the people of Rapa Nui, carved across roughly 5 centuries. Some were finished, some were abandoned in the quarry. Many were dragged across miles of rolling grassy land to platforms by the sea. Let the scale of that settle for a moment. The island itself is small, only about 64 square miles. You could drive across its longest stretch in less than an hour. If there were any roads built for speed, the whole place is roughly the size of a modest city. And yet, scattered across this small patch of land, the islanders made and moved nearly 1,000 stone giants. To feel the weight of one, try this comparison. A grand piano weighs about half a ton. A Moai of average size weighs roughly 28 pianos. The largest Moai ever attempted, still lying unfinished in the quarry, would weigh around 270 tons. That is close to the weight of a blue whale. The islanders were quietly preparing to lift a blue whale out of a mountain and carry it down to the sea. The distances they moved them were not short either. Some Moai traveled more than 10 miles from the quarry to their final platforms. 10 miles on foot, dragging a piece of stone the size of a small house. If you imagine walking from one side of a city to the other, then doing it again with a 14-ton sculpture in tow, you start to feel the weight of the achievement. And they did this, not once, but hundreds of times. How they did it is one of the gentler mysteries of the island. One theory, long popular, is that the Moai were laid on wooden sledges and rolled across logs. This idea fits the picture of a once forested island whose trees were used up in the effort. Another theory, supported by experiments in recent decades, is that the statues walked, not on their own, of course, but teams of people, using ropes tied around the head and base, may have rocked the upright statue from side to side, shuffling it forward step by careful step. Rapa Nui oral tradition itself speaks of the Moai walking. The islanders said the statues moved themselves in a slow, swaying gait, guided by the chants of those who carved them. Which method was used remains a quiet, open question. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps the answer changed across centuries as resources changed and methods evolved. The roads that connect the quarry to the coast still hold clues, with broken Moai lying along them like travelers who never finish the trip. Some lie face down, some face up. Some appear shaped specifically for upright transport, with wide bases and forward-leaning postures. Others seem better suited to being laid flat. To carve nearly 900 statues, you need carvers. To move them, you need teams of perhaps 50 to 150 people pulling together, by some estimates. And the island's population during the peak of Moai building is thought to have been somewhere between 3,000 and possibly 15,000. The range is wide because no one truly knows, but even at the high end, this means a substantial portion of the working population may have been involved in the long, slow choreography of stone. Think about that rhythm of life, a community small enough that everyone knew each other, organized around the patient labor of lifting ancestors out of a volcano and walking them to the sea. Generations born, raised and buried, while a single statue made its slow procession across the grass. Children who first saw a Moai standing in the quarry, then saw it pass their village years later, then saw it raised on its platform as elders. The numbers are large. The island is small. The hands that did the work were few, and somewhere inside that quiet arithmetic lives part of the mystery we are sitting with tonight. How a community this size, on a place this remote, summoned the will and the means to lift 1,000 giants from a mountain and walk them home. Let your eyes drift now across the surface of the island, as if you were floating just above the grass on a soft afternoon wind. The land below is not lush and not bare. It rolls in long green waves, the color of old moss and pale straw, broken here and there by black stone pushing up through the soil. The grass moves in slow patterns when the wind comes off the sea. Sheep tracks and old footpaths cross the slopes in faint pale lines, the way veins show through thin skin. If you look carefully at the open ground, you begin to see them. Roads, not paved, not raised, not lined with curbs the way we think of roads. They appear as gentle hollows in the earth, slight depressions where the grass grows a little differently. They wind across the island in long curving routes, leaving the great quarry at Rano Raku and stretching outward like the spokes of a soft wheel. Some run toward the southern coast, some run toward the north, some bend around hills as if they were following something living. Along these old paths, the Moai lie scattered, not standing, lying, some face down in the grass, their long backs to the sky. Some rest on their sides, half buried, as if they had sat down to rest and never stood again. You can count them if you walk the routes today, and researchers have counted somewhere near 100 of these fallen travelers spread along the road network, like beads dropped from a broken string. Their grey stone is darkened by lichen and rain. Their carved features blur softly under centuries of weather. From above, the pattern is striking. The roads do not run in straight, efficient lines the way a modern engineer might draw them. They curve. They rise over ridges and drop into shallow valleys. They seem, in places, to take the longer way around, and the statues lying along them are not random. Some appear to have been moving outward from the quarry toward distant platforms. Others appear to have been moving back, as if returning home. This second group is the one that puzzles people the most. One theory holds that the roads were simple transport corridors. The islanders cleared them, smoothed them, and walked the statues along them using ropes and the rocking method we wondered about in the last section. In this view, the fallen Moai are accidents, giants that tipped over during the long journey and could not be lifted again. The work was hard. The terrain was uneven. Statues broke. Statues fell. The road simply records the losses. Another theory looks at the same evidence and sees something different. Some researchers have noticed that the roads themselves seem too deliberate, too gently shaped, to be only practical paths. The hollows are slightly concave, like long shallow troughs. The fallen statues sit along them, in ways that almost feel placed, as if the road were also a sacred route, and the Moai were stations along it. In this reading, the journey of a statue was itself a ceremony. The road was a ribbon of meaning, and the Moai that lay along it were not failures at all. They were where they were meant to be. A third possibility sits quietly between these two ideas. Perhaps the roads were both. Practical paths that became sacred through use, working corridors that took on ritual weight because of what traveled along them. We may never sort the threads cleanly apart. Stand for a moment at one of these resting giants. The grass comes up around its shoulders. Small wildflowers grow in the cracks of its weathered face. Insects move in the lichen. Above, the sky is huge and pale, streaked with thin clouds that race in from the open ocean. The wind smells of salt and warm earth. You can hear the distant hush of waves against the cliffs, a sound that has not changed in 1,000 years. Walk the road a little further, and the next Moai appears, lying in the same direction, in the same posture, grey against the green. Then another, then another. The silence between them is its own kind of presence. No one is carving here. No one is hauling. The work has stopped, and stopped long ago. And the roads are now simply lines drawn across a quiet island, leading from a sleeping mountain toward a sea that holds no answers. What ended the long walk of the stones? Why did the carvers set down their tools and never pick them up again? The roads themselves do not say. They only lie there, soft hollows in the grass, pointing in directions we are still learning how to read. On the northern side of Rapa Nui, far from the great quarry where the Moai were born, there is another quiet hill. It is smaller, redder, softer in shape. Its name is Puna Pau. From a distance, it looks like a low cone of warm-colored earth, glowing faintly in the late sun. Inside this hill sleeps a different kind of stone, and a different kind of mystery. The stone here is not the grey volcanic tuff of the statue quarry. It is a deep, rust-colored rock called scoria. Scoria is light, porous, and full of tiny air pockets, like a hard sponge frozen in place. It feels almost weightless compared to the bodies of the Moai, and it has a color that no other stone on the island shares, a red so rich it almost looks painted, even when it is freshly broken. From this small red hill came the pukau. The pukau are the top knots, The great round crowns that once sat on the heads of certain Moai. They look like cylinders of dark red stone, sometimes wider than they are tall, sometimes carved with grooves and gentle curves along the top. On the largest statues, a pukau could weigh as much as 12 tons. Some are nearly 6 feet across. They are not small ornaments. They are stone hats the size of small cars. The first question that hangs in the air at Puna Pau is simple. How did anyone get them up there? The Moai themselves stand on stone platforms, sometimes 30 feet tall when fully assembled. The pukau had to rise to the very top of the head, balanced perfectly, without cranes, without metal tools, without wheels, and the red scoria had to travel several miles from the quarry to reach the coastal platforms where the Moai waited. There are several ideas, and none of them are settled. One theory is that the builders used long earthen ramps. They may have piled soil and stones into a sloping path, then rolled the pukau slowly upward until it could be tipped into place on the Moai's head. Another idea is that the pukau was raised separately, perhaps lifted with ropes, log levers, and patient teamwork over many days. A more recent suggestion involves a method called parbuckling, wrapping ropes around the cylinder and rolling it up a ramp with steady pulls from below. Each theory fits some of the evidence. None of them explains everything. The pukau themselves carry small clues. Many of them have shallow carvings on their upper surfaces, faint patterns that may once have been more visible. Researchers wonder whether these carvings represented hair tied in a knot, a feathered headdress, or simply the red paint of ceremonial clothing. Some scholars believe the pukau showed the high status of the Moai it crowned. Others think it marked a connection to specific ancestors or chiefs. The truth has not yet stepped fully into the light. Inside Puna Pau, the floor of the small crater is scattered with unfinished pukau. Some are partly carved, like loaves of dark bread still rising from the earth. Others are nearly complete, but never moved. They lie where the workers left them, as if everyone simply walked away one quiet afternoon and did not return. The grass grows soft over them now. Birds rest on their curved tops. The red dust of the hill stains the soles of anyone who walks through. Why the work stopped at Puna Pau, like at the larger quarry, remains an open question. Some researchers think the pause came when resources grew thin, and the great projects could no longer be supported. Others think the change was social, that the meaning of the Moai shifted, and the people turned toward new ceremonies and new symbols. Still others wonder if it happened gradually, with the carving slowing year by year, until one generation finally let the tools rest. What is clear is that the red crowns and the grey bodies came from 2 different places, 2 different stones, 2 different journeys across the island. To build a single crowned Moai, the people had to coordinate 2 long supply lines, 2 quarries, 2 teams, and 2 careful movements over rough terrain. This was not a simple task. It hints at a society organized far more deeply than its small size might suggest. Tonight, picture the soft red hill at sunset, the light glowing on the porous stone, the unfinished pukau resting in the grass, the quiet question of how those cylinders ever rose into the sky. The answers wait somewhere in the soil, in the oral memories, in the patient, slow work of researchers who return each year to ask again. For most of the years that visitors have come to this island, the Moai have stood with empty sockets, hollow shadows where eyes might have been. Many travelers, sketching them by lantern light, simply assumed the statues were always blind, that the carvers had left those deep wells unfinished, that the Moai gazed out across the grass without sight, like sleepers who had never quite woken. The truth, as the island slowly revealed it, was stranger and softer. In 1978, a researcher named Sergio Rapu was leading a careful restoration on the southern shore while workers sifted the soil near an ahu, the great stone platform where the Moai once stood. A small piece of white coral surfaced, then a fragment of dark red scoria. When they pieced the bits together, the shape became unmistakable. It was an eye, coral for the bright white, red stone or black obsidian for the dark center, carved to fit exactly into the hollow of a Moai's face. The discovery changed everything. The statues had once seen, or at least they had once been given the appearance of seeing. The empty sockets we know today are not the original design. They are the leftover spaces, the dark drawers of something that was once placed inside and later removed. The cycles here are slow and quiet, but they are cycles all the same. A Moai was carved in the quarry. It was moved across the land. It was raised onto its ahu, and then, in a ceremony whose details we no longer fully know, the eyes were set into place. Only then, some researchers believe, did the statue truly become alive. Only then did the spirit of the ancestor settle inside the stone. The eye setting was the final breath of the carving, the moment the figure stopped being rock and started being a guardian. What happened to the eyes is part of the open question. Very few coral eyes have been found. Some may have been removed and stored, perhaps brought out only for important ceremonies, then tucked away again. Others may have been buried with the dead. Others, perhaps, were broken in later upheavals and scattered into the soil, where storms and centuries pulled them apart. The eye recovered by Sergio Rapu is among only a small handful that have ever been pieced back together. The rest remain missing, or perhaps still resting somewhere in the earth, waiting for a careful trowel. This raises a softer mystery. If the eyes were placed only during ceremonies, then most of the Moai, for most of their standing lives, may have been blind too. The opened gaze may have been rare and sacred, brought forth on certain days, under certain skies. The rest of the time, the statues watch the island the way a sleeping face watches a quiet room, present but inward, waiting. There is something deeply human about this rhythm. We close our own eyes each night. We open them again each morning. Across the island, the same gentle motion may have played out at the scale of stone and ceremony. The ancestors slept, and then, on the right day, they looked. The whole village would gather. The white coral would catch the sunlight. The red center would glow. For a few hours, the Moai would not just stand, it would witness. Other researchers are more cautious. They wonder whether eyes were set permanently in some statues and only ceremonially in others. They wonder whether the practice changed over the centuries, with earlier Moai having different rituals than later ones. The evidence is thin, scattered, and easy to misread. Coral does not survive the centuries as well as stone. A few fragments cannot tell the whole story. So this too remains an open question, sitting quietly beside all the others the island holds. What we can say is that the Moai were not meant to be the silent, hollow shapes we see in photographs today. They were once finished. They wore their red topknots above. They held their coral gazes within. The whole composition would have shimmered in the long Pacific light. A row of crowned ancestors facing inward toward the villages, watching over the gardens and the children and the small daily lives unfolding on the green slopes. That image is hard to hold in the mind, because the island today is mostly grass and wind. The bright eyes are gone, the crowns lie tumbled. The faces are weathered into softness, and yet somewhere beneath the soil, in pockets the rain has not yet found, more coral eyes may still be waiting. Closed for now, sleeping perhaps the way the listener is also beginning to sleep. A Moai never stands alone. Even the ones that look solitary in old photographs once belonged to a family of stone, set upon a long, low altar of carefully fitted blocks. These altars are called ahu. They are the quiet neighbors of the giants, and in many ways they are the deeper mystery. The statues catch the eye. The platforms hold the meaning. Picture a long ribbon of coastline at dusk. The sea moves slowly against dark volcanic rock. Just inland from the shore, a low stone wall stretches across the grass, perhaps 100 feet from end to end. On top of that wall, the Moai rise in a row, their backs turned to the ocean, their faces watching the village that once spread before them. The ahu is the body, the Moai are the heads. Without the platform, the statue is only a sculpture. With it, the figure becomes part of something sacred. Hundreds of these platforms ring the island. Some are small and humble, with a single weathered figure leaning against the sky. Others are vast, holding 7, 10, even 15 Moai shoulder to shoulder. The largest known platform, Ahu Tongariki, carries 15 restored statues in a line so long it seems to bend with the curve of the earth. To walk along its base is to feel very small and very welcomed at the same time. Archaeologists believe these ahu were places of the ancestors. The Moai, standing on them, are thought to represent important figures from earlier generations, watching over their descendants and the land that fed them. Beneath some platforms, researchers have found human remains carefully placed within stone chambers. This suggests the ahu were tombs as well as monuments. The dead were not gone. They were lifted up, given a face, and set above the living. The construction itself is its own quiet wonder. Each platform is built from fitted basalt blocks, some of them many tons in weight. The seaward walls of the largest ahu are especially well made, with stones shaped and joined so closely that a blade of grass can barely slip between them. This style of fitting has reminded some observers of stonework found far away across the Pacific, in places like Peru. Some researchers wonder whether this hints at distant contact between Polynesian voyages and the coasts of South America. Others believe the resemblance is a coincidence, the natural result of skilled builders solving the same problem in similar ways. The question remains open. What is clearer is that the ahu were not all built at once. Layer by layer, generation by generation, they were added to and rebuilt. A platform might begin as a modest shrine, then grow taller, wider, and grander as new statues were raised and old ones moved. Sometimes earlier Moai were buried inside the platform itself, used as construction stone for the next stage. The ancestors were placed within the home of their descendants, hidden inside the walls. To dig into an ahu today is to dig into a kind of family history made of basalt. The arrangement of these platforms around the island also tells a story. Most of them face inland, toward where villages once stood. The Moai look at the people, they do not look out to sea. There is one notable exception, a platform called Ahu Akivi, where 7 statues face the ocean. According to one tradition, these figures represent 7 explorers sent ahead to find the island before the main voyage. Whether that tradition is literal history or remembered metaphor, no one can say for certain. It is one of those gentle puzzles that refuses to settle. Between the platforms and the inland slopes lay the gardens, the houses, the chicken pens, the stone-walled enclosures where crops were grown in the shelter of lava rocks. Life happened in this middle ground. The ahu marked the edge between the living world and the world of the ancestors. The shore behind them was the realm of weather and travel. The land before them was the realm of food and family. The statues stood on the boundary, looking inward, as if to keep the household in view. Why so many Ahu, on such a small island, built with such care by a community that some accounts describe as struggling, remains part of the larger riddle. The platforms required immense effort. They suggest a society with time, organization, and shared belief. They do not easily fit the picture of a people on the edge of collapse. They suggest, instead, a community in long conversation with its dead, building neighborhood after neighborhood of stone ancestors along the rim of the sea. What that conversation truly meant to them, we are still trying to hear. Before people ever set foot on Rapa Nui, the island wore a different face. A thick forest covered most of its slopes. The trees were not small. One of them, a giant palm now lost to the world, may have been among the largest palms that ever grew on Earth. Its trunk could reach more than 2 meters across at the base. Its crown rose high into the warm Pacific air. Picture a green canopy rolling across the volcanoes, broken only by patches of grass and the blue rim of the sea. That forest is gone now, almost completely. The Rapa Nui that visitors see today is a landscape of soft, rolling grass, low shrubs, and bare volcanic stone. The wind moves freely across the hills because there is little left to slow it. Somewhere between the arrival of the first settlers and the centuries that followed, the forest disappeared. How fast it vanished, and why, is one of the largest open questions on the island. The lost palm has a name in scientific circles. Researchers call it Pascalocus disperta. They know it existed because its nuts and root casts still show up in the soil, hardened into shapes that geologists can read like fingerprints. The nuts are small and ridged, a little like coconuts. The root casts are stone tubes left behind, where living roots once pressed into the earth. From these traces, scientists have pieced together a picture of a tall, slow-growing palm that dominated the island for thousands of years. Then, within a window of perhaps a few centuries, the pollen record thins out. Cores drilled from the bottoms of the island's crater lakes show layer after layer of palm pollen, rich and steady, going back deep into prehistory. Higher up in the cores, that pollen begins to fade. Grass pollen rises to take its place. By the upper layers, palm pollen is almost gone. The forest, in the slow language of sediment, simply stops. One theory is that the islanders cut the trees down themselves. They needed wood to cook, to build canoes, to warm their houses, and possibly to help move the great stone statues across the land. Over generations, the cutting may have outpaced the slow regrowth of the palms. A tree that takes 100 years to mature cannot be replaced in a single lifetime. Under this view, the loss of the forest was a long, quiet act of human use, stretched across many human lives. Another theory points away from the axe and towards something smaller: rats. The first canoes that reached Rapa Nui likely carried Polynesian rats, either as stowaways or as a food source. On an island with no native predators to keep them in check, the rats may have multiplied into the millions, and the giant palm, with its soft, sweet nuts, would have been a feast. Nuts found in dry caves across the island showed tiny gnaw marks. Some researchers wonder if rat damage to the seeds prevented new palms from sprouting, even as the older trees aged and fell. Under this view, the forest may have died not from cutting, but from a failure to renew itself. Most likely, the truth involves both: cutting burning for gardens, rats eating the seeds, and a fragile island climate that did not forgive mistakes. Rapa Nui sits far from any continent. Its soil is thin in places, its rainfall is uneven, A forest under stress from many directions at once can fail in a way that no single cause fully explains. What stands out is the scale. This was not a small grove. It was, by some estimates, around 16 million trees lost from a single small island. The largest of them may have been giants of their kind, and when they were gone for good. Pascalococos disperta has no living relatives on the island. The species is extinct. The closest cousins grow on other Pacific islands, smaller and quieter, hinting only faintly at what once stood on Rapa Nui. The bare hills of today carry the memory of that lost canopy in their soil chemistry, in their wind patterns, in the way rain runs across the slopes, instead of soaking gently into a forest floor. To stand on the island now is to stand inside an absence. The shape of the missing forest is still there, written into the land in negative. How quickly it all unfolded, whether it was sudden or slow, whether the people watched it happen or never noticed until it was too late, remains uncertain. The pollen layers can tell us that it happened. They cannot quite tell us how it felt. Down in the soil of Rapa Nui, beneath the grass and the dust, there are tiny clues that the island has not finished telling its story. These clues are small, they are quiet. Most of them would fit on the tip of a finger, but scientists have spent decades bending close to the ground, sifting and brushing and squinting through lenses, hoping these little fragments will whisper something true about the palm trees that once stood here. The clues begin with the nuts. Buried in old layers of earth, researchers have found the hard shells of palm seeds. They look a little like coconuts, only smaller and rougher. Their outer husks are pitted and scarred. Many of them carry curious marks. The marks look like the gnawing of small teeth, tiny teeth, the teeth of rats. That single detail has changed the way many researchers think about the missing forest. For a long time, the simple story was that people cut the palms down. They needed wood for fires, for houses, for rolling stones across the land. The picture was of axes swinging and trunks falling day after day, until the last tall tree was gone. It is a powerful image, but the gnawed seeds suggest something quieter and perhaps stranger. The rats may have eaten the future of the forest, one nut at a time. A palm tree, after all, cannot grow if its seed never sprouts, and a seed that has been chewed open by a small hungry animal will not sprout. So even as the old trees stood tall, their children may have been quietly disappearing into the bellies of rodents who arrived on the same canoes as the first people. Whether this alone could have erased the forest, no one yet knows for certain. Some researchers think it played a leading role. Others think it was only one thread in a much larger weaving. The soil holds other small wonders too. Pollen grains, almost too tiny to see, settle in layers at the bottom of the island's 3 small crater lakes. Each grain has a shape as distinct as a fingerprint. When scientists drill down through the muddy sediment, they pull up cores that read like a calendar of vanished plants. Near the bottom of these cores, palm pollen is everywhere, drifting through the layers like soft yellow dust. Higher up, closer to our own time, the palm pollen thins, then it almost disappears. Grass pollen takes its place. The shift is gradual. It does not happen overnight. It takes centuries. And that slowness is itself a kind of clue. A swift, violent clearing of the land would leave a sharper line in the mud. What the cores show instead is a long, patient fading. There are other small details that resist easy answers. In old garden beds across the island, archaeologists have found stones arranged in low piles and circles. These are called lithic mulches. The stones are not random. They were placed by careful hands to shelter young plants from the wind, to hold moisture in the dry soil, to soak up the warmth of the sun and release it slowly into the night air. Each stone is small. Each placement is deliberate. Together they cover huge areas of the island. A garden built this way is not the work of a society that has given up. It is the work of people who are paying close attention, who are reading the wind and the rain and the temperature of the ground. Some researchers see in these stone gardens a different kind of story. A story not of collapse, but of careful, clever adaptation as the trees thinned and the climate shifted. Other researchers caution that adaptation and hardship can live side by side, and that even a clever society can suffer deeply. The smallest details of all may be the ones still hidden. Under a microscope, charred bits of wood from old hearths reveal what kind of trees burned in the cooking fires. Phytoliths, the tiny silica skeletons left behind when a plant decays, hold the shapes of grasses and leaves long after the plants themselves are gone. Each one is a quiet witness. What these witnesses are saying is still being argued over in quiet rooms with bright lamps. The palm forest is gone. That much is certain. But how it left, how quickly, how much was the work of people and how much the work of small teeth in the dark remains a riddle held together by chewed seeds and pollen grains and the patient stones of long-tended gardens. When the first Polynesian voyagers stepped onto the shores of Rapa Nui, they did not arrive alone. In the bottoms of their long, double-hulled canoes, tucked among the bundles of taro and yam and the careful cuttings of paper mulberry, traveled small dark passengers. The Polynesian rat, called Quarry, came with them. It came on every island they settled across the wide Pacific. Some rats came by accident, hiding in baskets and bedding. Others may have come on purpose, carried as a source of food for long voyages and lean seasons. Either way, when the canoes pulled onto the black sand of Rapa Nui, the rats came too. For a long time, no one studying the island thought much about these little travelers. The eye was drawn to the giant stone faces, the platforms, the ruined village walls. The rats lived in the margins, the way they always do. But in the last few decades, a quiet shift has happened in the way researchers think about what shaped the island. Some scientists have begun to wonder if the rats may have done as much to change Rapa Nui as the people did. The reasoning rests on a few patient discoveries. When researchers sifted through the soil layers and the old volcanic crater beds, they found palm nuts. Many palm nuts, and many of those nuts showed the same telltale marks. Small gnawed grooves around the shell, exactly the size of rat teeth. The nuts had been chewed open. The seeds inside, which would have grown into the next generation of palms, were gone. This is where one of the most debated theories of the island enters the picture. The classic story said the people cut down the forest themselves, log by log, to roll the moai across the land and to build canoes and houses until the trees were gone. The newer theory does not erase the people from that story. It simply adds the rats. A breeding pair of rats, with no natural predators on the island, can multiply into millions within a few years. Millions of small, hungry mouths, eating the seeds before they could ever sprout. The trees that fell to axes might never have been replaced, not because no one planted them, but because the soil itself was no longer giving birth to new ones. Other researchers push back gently on this idea. They point out that rats lived on many Polynesian islands, and not all of those islands lost their forests. Some kept their palms, some kept their soils rich, so the rats alone cannot be the answer. Perhaps it was the rats and the axes together. Perhaps it was the rats and the dry winds and the thin volcanic soil. Perhaps it was a slow weaving of pressures, each one small on its own, that together unraveled something that had held for centuries. The history of how all this came to light is itself a quiet story. Early visitors to Rapa Nui in the 18th and 19th centuries described a treeless place and assumed it had always looked that way. It was only when scientists began drilling cores into the old lake beds inside the volcanic craters, pulling up cylinders of mud that held pollen grains thousands of years old, that the truth slowly emerged. Layer by layer, the pollen told the story. Deep down, there was palm pollen, thick and abundant. Higher up, less. Higher still, almost none. Somewhere in those middle layers, a forest had quietly disappeared. The rats entered the story later, in the careful work of archaeologists picking through middens and cave deposits, counting bones and shells and the gnawed husks of nuts. The picture they sketched is still being drawn. No one is yet sure what percentage of the forest loss to credit to the people, what percentage to the rodents, and what percentage to the slow changes in the island's climate during those centuries. What lingers when you sit with all of this is how easy it is to miss the small things. The grand stone faces draw the eye. The fallen platforms ask their hard questions. Meanwhile, the real change may have begun with something almost too small to notice, scurrying along a beam in the dark of a canoe, at sea, hungry and quiet, looking for a place to land. The full story is still being unraveled in the dim corners of museum collections and in the patient mud of crater lakes. New samples are still being taken, old assumptions are still being questioned, and somewhere in that ongoing work lies a gentler version of an old story, one in which the people of Rapa Nui were not the only authors of what happened to their island, and in which the smallest visitors may have written some of the heaviest lines. Most people picture the people of Rapa Nui as stone carvers and little more. Stone carvers they were, and master builders, and movers of great weights, but the story is wider than that. The same people who shaped the Moai also watched the sky with a careful and patient eye. They knew the turning of the seasons, the rising places of certain stars, and the slow drift of the sun along the horizon. They built into their stone what they saw in the sky. This part of the story surprises many listeners. The island feels, from far away, like a small and isolated place. It is easy to picture its people as cut off from the larger world of ideas. Yet, the evidence on the ground tells a different tale. The Ahu platforms, those long stone bases that hold the Moai, are not placed at random. Many of them line up with the path of the sun. Some face the rising sun at the equinox, when day and night are balanced. Others align with the solstices, the 2 days each year when the sun reaches its farthest points. To build that kind of alignment, you need more than guesswork. You need to mark a horizon, return to the same spot, and notice where the sun appears at certain times of the year. You need to pass that knowledge from one generation to the next. The people of Rapa Nui did this with no written instructions that we have ever found. The knowledge lived in memory, in chant, in practice. There is a site on the island called Ahuakivi. 7 Moai stand there together, facing out toward the sea. This in itself is unusual, because most Moai face inland, watching over the villages. The 7 of Ahuakivi look the other way. They also stand in a line that aligns closely with the setting sun at the spring equinox, and with the rising sun at the autumn equinox. Whether that alignment was the central purpose, or one purpose among several, is still debated. Some researchers believe these alignments were tools used to mark the planting season, the fishing season, or the right time for ceremonies. Others wonder if the alignments were more symbolic, woven into the spiritual life of the island, rather than its calendar. A third view holds that both things were true at once, that the practical and the sacred were not separate categories for the people who built these places. The truth may sit somewhere between, and the evidence is not yet complete enough to settle it. The stars added another layer. Certain bright stars rise at certain times of year, and to a seafaring people, those risings are a kind of clock. The ancestors of the Rapa Nui had reached this island by crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. They had done so by reading the night sky. That knowledge did not vanish when they landed. It lived on, even when the long voyages stopped. Some traditions remember the names of stars and the seasons they marked. Other knowledge was lost in the disruptions that came later. There are hints, too, of an interest in the moon. A few sites on the island show possible lunar alignments, though the evidence here is softer and more contested. Tracking the moon is harder than tracking the sun, because the moon's path shifts in a longer cycle that takes nearly 19 years to complete. Whether the islanders followed that cycle, or simply watched the moon for shorter rhythms like tides and nights, remains an open question. What feels strange when you sit with it is the contrast. A small island, far from any other land, with a population that may have peaked in the low thousands, and yet within that small population lived astronomers, navigators, stonemasons, farmers, woodworkers, and keepers of long memory. The picture of a simple society does not fit. The picture is of a culture that carried a great deal of knowledge in a small space, and that used stone to record some of what it knew. That makes the later decline even harder to read. When a society holds this much knowledge, what happens to the knowledge when the society is disrupted? Some of it lives on in the descendants of Rapa Nui, who carry their traditions today. Some of it lives in the stones themselves, in their patient alignments with the sun. And some of it surely is gone. We do not know how much. We only know that the people who shaped these giants were also reading a wider book, written in light, that we are still learning to read alongside them. At some point in Rapa Nui's long story, something changed. The great age of carving the Moai began to slow. Fewer statues were raised on the platforms. Fewer eyes of white coral were set into their faces. And in the same long stretch of time, a new tradition rose to take its place. A tradition that did not stand still in stone. A tradition that moved and ran and swam and climbed. This was the Birdman cult, known in the Rapa Nui language as Tangatamanu. And to understand it, you have to picture a corner of the island where the land simply ends. On the southwestern tip of Rapa Nui sits a great volcanic crater called Ranokau. Its rim rises high above the sea. Inside the crater, a freshwater lake gleams like a green mirror, dotted with floating reeds. On the outer edge of that rim, perched on the cliffs, the people built a village of low stone houses with thick walls and narrow doors. They called this place Orongo. From Orongo, the cliffs drop straight down into the deep blue Pacific, and just offshore, 3 small rocky islets rise from the waves. The largest is called Motu Nui. Each year, when the southern spring approached, a sooty tern called the Manutara would fly in from the open ocean and lay its eggs on those islets. The arrival of this small, dark seabird marked the start of one of the strangest competitions ever held on Earth. Chiefs from across the island chose champions. These champions, called Hopu, would climb down the steep cliffs below Orongo. They would slip into the cold sea and swim out to Motu Nui on small floats made of bundled reeds. Then they waited, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, camped in caves on the islet, watching the sky, listening for the cry of the first term, the first hopu to find an egg, carry it safely back across the water, and climb the cliffs again would crown his chief as the Birdman of that year. That chief would then hold a sacred status for the next 12 months. The carvings at Orongo still show this story. Smooth volcanic boulders along the cliff edge are etched with figures that have human bodies and the long curved beaks of frigate birds. Some hold eggs in their hands. There are hundreds of these images, layered one over another, carved across many generations. The stone itself remembers the race. What makes this so interesting is the way it seems to connect to everything else on the island. The Birdman cult did not appear in a vacuum. It rose during a time when the old system of building Moai was already shifting. Some researchers wonder if the cult emerged as a new way to choose leadership, when the old way, tied to ancestor statues and family platforms, was no longer working as well. In this view, the ritual was a peaceful answer to a hard question. How do you decide who leads when the land can no longer feed every grand ambition? Others see it differently. One competing idea is that the Birdman cult was not a replacement at all, but something that had always existed quietly alongside the Moai tradition, only growing more visible as the statues stopped being raised. The evidence is not clear enough to settle the matter. What is clear is how beautifully the ritual fit the place. The sooty turns came because the Southern Ocean's currents pulled cold, nutrient-rich water up along the islets. The currents fed small fish. The fish drew the birds. The birds nested on the islets because no rats lived there to steal their eggs. And the people, watching all of this, built their ceremony around the rhythm of an ecosystem they could not control but could read with great care. It is a kind of symphony. The wind from the south, the drifting tern, the volcanic crater that gave a sweeping view of the sea, the cliffs that demanded courage, the reeds in the lake that gave the swimmers their floats, the painted carvings that kept the memory alive. Every part of the Birdman race depended on every other part of the island, and underneath all of it lay the older question: why did this new tradition rise when it did? Was it born from hardship, or from a slow shift in belief? Did it ease the pressures on the island, or did it simply reflect them? Some scholars argue one way, some argue another. The carvings at Orongo do not say, they only watch the sea with their curved beaks and their stone eggs, waiting still for a bird that has long since flown away. The race itself, like so much else here, holds its answers close. Among the many quiet puzzles Rapa Nui holds, one rests in the form of small wooden tablets. They are called rongo-rongo. On their smooth surfaces, careful hands once carved tiny, repeating shapes. Birds with curved beaks, fish, human figures with raised arms, spirals, stars, plants, tools, row after row of glyphs, each no larger than a fingernail, pressed into dark wood, polished by time. They sit today in museums in scattered corners of the world, behind quiet glass, and no one alive knows for certain how to read them. Only about 24 genuine rongo-rongo objects survive. Some are tablets shaped like long flat boards. Some are staffs or pendants, or the curved chest ornaments worn by people of high rank. The carving is delicate and patient. The lines run in a strange pattern called reverse baustrophedum, which means the reader must turn the tablet upside down at the end of each line and continue reading the next. To follow the script, the eyes and the hands move together in a slow rocking rhythm. What the glyphs mean remains an open question. Scholars have spent more than a century trying to crack the script. Some have proposed that it is true writing, recording language sound by sound, the way letters record speech. Others suggest it is something different, a memory aid perhaps, where each glyph reminds a trained chanter of a longer passage held in the mind. Still others think it falls somewhere between, mixing pictures, sounds, and ritual signs in ways that no other script on earth quite matches. The debate continues, gentle and unresolved. What makes Rongorongo even more curious is its timing. There is no clear evidence that the script existed when Polynesian voyagers first reached the island. No other Polynesian culture across the wide spread of the Pacific developed a comparable system of carved glyphs. So one quiet theory wonders whether Rongorongo was an old island invention that grew slowly in isolation over generations. Another theory wonders whether it emerged later, perhaps even after the first European ships arrived in the 18th century, when islanders saw writing for the first time and were moved to create something of their own. The two ideas point in very different directions, and the carved wood itself does not say which is correct. The tablets have changed across the centuries, just as everything on the island has. Many were lost. Some were burned during the difficult years of the 19th century, when missionaries arrived, and old objects were sometimes destroyed or hidden. Others were taken from the island by visiting ships and scattered into distant collections. By the time anyone tried to study the script carefully, the small community of trained readers had largely disappeared. The chain of knowledge, passed from teacher to student through chanting and memory, was broken. A few elders in the late 19th century were asked to read aloud from the surviving tablets. Some did. Their recitations were written down, but the recordings are uneven, sometimes inconsistent, and scholars still argue about whether the elders were truly reading the glyphs or simply chanting familiar prayers prompted by the shapes. One careful reading from one tablet seemed to list the names of plants and small offerings. That single fragment offered a brief flicker of meaning. The rest of the script stayed quiet. In our own time, the changes continue. Researchers now study the tablets with high-resolution scans and computer analysis. They count how often each glyph appears, which glyphs sit beside which, and whether patterns match the rhythms of spoken Rapa Nui language. Some of these studies hint at structure that looks like real writing. Others find patterns that look more like ritual repetition. The wood itself has been carbon dated, and the dates so far suggest the surviving tablets are not especially old. Whether older tablets once existed and were lost remains another open question. The script matters to the larger mystery of the island because it sits at the heart of the change. Whatever Rongorongo recorded, much of it was probably forgotten during the same difficult century, when the population fell, when statues stopped being raised, and when oral traditions were strained by loss. The unread glyphs may hold genealogies, prayers, navigation knowledge, or accounts of the very events researchers most wish to understand. Or they may hold something else entirely, something we have not yet imagined. For now, the tablets rest in their quiet cases. Their tiny figures keep their secret. Each glyph is a small carved silence, waiting. The script changes nothing about the wood. The wood changes nothing about the script. Only our patient attention, slowly and across generations, may one day coax a sentence into the light, or it may not. The question stays open, and the car. The light on Rapa Nui has a particular quality. The island sits so far from any other land that the air above it carries almost no dust, no smoke, no haze drifting in from distant cities. The sun rises clean over the Pacific. It paints the volcanic slopes in long golden bands and it picks out every crack in every stone face along the coast. For most of the island's history, this light fell only on the eyes of the Rapa Nui people. They knew its angles. They knew how it slid across the Moai at dawn, and how it pooled in the craters at dusk. Then, on an Easter Sunday in 1722, a different kind of shape appeared on the bright edge of the sea. Sails, wooden ships, from far away, carrying men who had never seen this island and who could not pronounce its name. The Dutch expedition led by Jacob Roggeveen anchored offshore and gave the island the name we still use in many languages today. They stayed only a few days. They saw the standing statues. They wrote a few short notes. Then they sailed on, taking the image of the island back into the wider world. That brief meeting changed something the light could not show. Before that day, Rapa Nui had been its own world for many centuries. After it, the island would slowly become a place that other ships could find. The horizon, once empty, now held the possibility of arrival. The visits that followed were scattered and strange. A Spanish expedition came in 1770, a British one, led by James Cook, came in 1774. A French expedition came in 1786. Each ship stayed briefly. Each set of visitors wrote down a few impressions, often confused, often filtered through their own ideas about what an island society should look like. Some described thriving gardens. Others described thin, weary people. The accounts do not always agree, and historians still argue about what those differences mean. One reading is that the island was already in steep decline by the time the first European ships arrived, and that the visitors were simply describing a society in trouble. Another reading is that the visitors arrived during particular seasons or particular years, and that their snapshots cannot be stretched into a full picture. A third reading is that the very act of being visited, even briefly, began to disturb the island in ways the writers did not understand. The truth may sit somewhere among all three. The records are too thin to settle it. What the records do agree on is that something was strange about the statues. By the late 1700s, some of the Moai were no longer standing. Visitors described fallen figures lying on their faces in the grass. By the mid-1800s, nearly all of the standing statues along the coast had been pulled down. The light that once fell on rows of upright ancestors now fell on long stone bodies stretched across the ground. No one outside the island watched this happen. No outside log records the moment of any single fall. The toppling unfolded in a silence that the visiting ships did not catch. Then, in the 1860s, the light on Rapa Nui darkened in a far more terrible way. Slave raiders from Peru arrived and took many people from the island by force. Disease arrived with returning captives and with later ships. The population, already small, fell sharply. By the 1870s, only a few hundred Rapa Nui people remained on the island. With them went much of the living memory of what the statues meant, how the script was read, and how the old ceremonies were performed. This is the gentlest way to say a very hard truth, and we will let it sit there gently. The mystery of what really happened to the people of Rapa Nui cannot be separated from this moment. For a long time, the dominant story blamed the islanders themselves. They cut their forest, they overbuilt, they collapsed under their own weight. But more recent work asks a harder question. How much of what looked like collapse was actually the slow shadow of outside contact falling across an island that had been surviving in its own quiet way for centuries? The light here cuts two ways. It shows the beauty of the place. It also shows how easily a story written from the outside can miss what was really there. Tonight, as the sails appear on that 1722 horizon, in your mind, hold both possibilities at once. The island was changing, the world was arriving. And somewhere between those two truths, the real answer waits. Listen for a moment to what the island would have sounded like in the years after the strangers began to return. Not the loud sounds, the quiet ones, the hush that fell across villages where children used to play, the slow creak of a wooden door left open in the wind, the soft lap of waves on a shore where fewer canoes now rested. This is the sound of a population shrinking, not in a single thunderclap, but in a long, low fading that stretched across decades. In the middle of the 19th century, ships came to Rapa Nui with darker intentions than curiosity. Slave raiders from distant ports arrived along the coast. They seized people and carried them away to work in mines and on plantations far across the sea. The exact numbers are still debated, but historians believe that around 1,500 islanders were taken in the worst years. For a population already small, this was a wound that cut very deep. The sound of that loss is hard to describe. Imagine a chant that needs many voices, and then imagine half those voices gone. Imagine the songs at the Yahoo platforms growing thinner. Imagine the names of ancestors that no longer had anyone left to speak them aloud. Some of the people taken were elders. Some were the keepers of stories, the readers of the carved tablets, the ones who held the memory of how the Moai had been moved. When they did not return, parts of the island's voice went silent with them. A small number were eventually sent back home, but the journey itself carried something invisible and terrible. Smallpox traveled with the returning islanders. The disease found a population that had never encountered it before. Within a short time, sickness swept through the villages. Whole families fell ill. The sound of coughing replaced the sound of singing. In many huts, the quiet that followed was the quiet of empty doorways. By the 1870s, the population of Rapa Nui had dropped to around 110 people, 110, on an island that had once held many thousands. This is the number that haunts the history books. It is the lowest point, the moment when the entire culture of the island balanced on the lives of a few survivors. The fact that anything at all came through that narrow doorway is itself a quiet wonder. And here is where the central question grows complicated. For a long time, the popular story of Rapa Nui placed the collapse much earlier. It said the islanders had ruined their own home before any outsider arrived. But the documented, recorded, painful shrinking of the population happens in the 1800s, after contact, slavery, disease, forced removal. These are not theories. These are written events with names and dates. So one view holds that the great shadow over Rapa Nui fell from outside. The island's people, in this telling, were doing reasonably well when European ships first arrived in 1722. They had adapted. They had survived the loss of the palm forest. They had built gardens that worked. The catastrophe came later, brought by sails on the horizon. Another view holds that the picture is more layered. Perhaps the island's society had already been changing, shifting away from monument building, adjusting to a thinner ecosystem. Perhaps internal pressures and external blows combined in ways that neither alone could fully explain. The truth may be a weaving of both threads, and researchers are still working to separate them. What we can say is that the sound of Rapa Nui changed. The deep rhythm of stone being shaped at Rano Raraku had already slowed. The ceremonial songs at the platforms continued, but with fewer voices. Then came the foreign ships, the raids, the fevers, and, by the late 1800s, the soundscape of the island was almost unrecognizable from what it had been only a century or two before. Yet, the silence was never total. A small group held on. They remembered fragments of the old chants. They kept the names of the platforms. They passed down stories of the carvers and the moving stones, even when those stories had grown thin in places where elders had been lost. The thread of culture stretched, frayed but did not snap. Tonight, picture the island under a soft moon. The great stone faces stand quiet along the coast. The wind moves through low grass. Somewhere in a small village, a single voice begins a song that has been sung for generations. The voice is one of many that survived. We still do not fully know which forces did the most to nearly silence this place. We only know that something here refused to disappear. For a long time, the story of Rapa Nui was told in simple numbers. A small group of settlers arrived. Over a few centuries, the population grew. It climbed to a peak of perhaps 15,000 people, maybe even more. Then, the old story said, it crashed. By the time outside ships began to call regularly, only a few thousand remained. The math felt clean, almost too clean. A rise, a peak, a fall, a tidy curve that fit neatly on a page. But the more carefully researchers look at the numbers, the less tidy the curve becomes. The peak itself is uncertain. Some estimates place it as low as 3,000, others reach as high as 17 or even 20,000. The island is small, only about 63 square miles of rolling grass and old volcanoes. The carrying capacity of that land, the number of people it could feed in a steady way, depends on how you count the gardens, the chickens, the fishing, the rock mulch fields. Change one assumption, and the whole story shifts. The timing of the decline is just as slippery. The classic version says the population crashed before Europeans arrived. The crash in that telling was self-inflicted. People cut too many trees, fought too many wars, and starved. The numbers were said to fall sharply somewhere in the 1600s or early 1700s, but newer studies of garden soils, of carbon dates from house floors, of the spread of stone gardens across the island, tell a quieter story. They suggest the population may have stayed fairly steady, or even grown slowly, right up until the first foreign sails appeared in 1722. If that newer reading is correct, then the steep fall in numbers happened after contact, not before. Slave raids in the 1860s took away nearly half the surviving people in a matter of months. Smallpox and tuberculosis followed by 1877. Only 111 Rapa Nui people remained on the island. The math of that fall is brutal and clear. From thousands to barely 100 in a single generation. Whatever the peak had been, the deepest valley came late, and it came from outside. So which curve is true? The slow internal collapse with a small bump at the end from disease, or the steady island life that was shattered suddenly by foreign ships? The honest answer is that the data does not yet settle the question. Different methods give different shapes. Tree pollen counts suggest one thing. Obsidian flake dating suggests another. Counts of house foundations and garden walls suggest a third. Each method has its own quiet bias, its own gaps. There is a kind of beauty in this uncertainty. The island becomes a problem in soft arithmetic, where every input is a guess and every output is a range. Researchers now talk in probability clouds rather than sharp lines. They draw curves with shaded edges, showing where the real number might live. The shaded edges are wide. They overlap. They leave room for many stories to be true at once. Some of the simpler ratios still hold their charm, roughly 1 Moai for every 20 or 30 people. If you take the higher population estimates, roughly 900 statues across the whole island, with about 400 still inside the quarry, about 300 Ahu platforms scattered along the coast, like beads on a necklace. These numbers feel solid because you can walk among them and count. The harder numbers, the ones about how many people lived and ate and slept here at any given moment, drift like fog. What the new mathematics suggests, gently, is that the word collapse may not fit a society that kept building gardens, kept tending its rock mulch fields, kept carving in the quarry into the 17th century. Does not look like a society falling apart. It looks like a society adapting, smaller in some ways perhaps, different in its rituals, but functioning. The truly catastrophic numbers belong to the contact period, when outside forces arrived with weapons and germs and ships, and yet the older story is not gone. Some researchers still argue that the island had already passed its peak by the time the Dutch arrived. They point to abandoned ahu, to half-finished statues, to changes in diet visible in old bones. The debate is real and ongoing. The elegant equation that once described Rapa Nui has been replaced by a messier one, full of variables and competing terms. For tonight, the numbers stay open. The curve has no settled shape. Somewhere in those soft, shaded ranges lies the truth of what happened to the people who carved the giants. We do not yet know where. We may, in time, learn more. To understand what happened on the Moai island, it helps to look at the small things, not the giant statues, not the great platforms, the smaller pieces, the bones in the soil, the seeds in the gardens, the quiet signs of people simply living year after year on a tiny piece of land in the middle of the sea. Rapa Nui sits alone. The nearest inhabited island lies more than 1,000 miles away. The ocean around it is deep and wide, and mostly empty. To survive there at all, the people had to build something delicate, a balance between what the land could give and what they needed to take. A system where nothing was wasted. The soil on the island is thin in many places. The wind blows hard across the open ground. Rain falls, but not as much as on the green islands far to the west. To grow food in a place like this, the people had to be clever, and the evidence shows they were. Archaeologists have found something they call lithic mulch gardens. The word lithic just means stone. The people gathered loose rocks and spread them across their planting fields. The stones held in moisture during dry days. They protected young plants from the wind. They slowly released minerals into the soil as they weathered. A simple idea, a patient one. It turned thin, fragile ground into something that could feed a family. Inside small rock shelters called manavai, the people grew bananas, taro, and sugarcane. These shelters were like little walled gardens. The stones blocked the salt spray and the worst of the wind. Inside, the air stayed warmer and stiller. A tender plant could grow there when it could not survive in the open. The main crop was the sweet potato. It came from somewhere far to the east, probably South America, carried across the ocean in ways researchers still puzzle over. The sweet potato grew well in the volcanic soil. It stored energy. It fed many mouths through the long, lean months when the sea was rough and fishing was hard. The bones in the middens tell another part of the story. A midden is just an old trash heap, the place where people threw their scraps. From these quiet piles, archaeologists learn what people ate. On Rapa Nui, they find fish bones, chicken bones, and rat bones. They find sea urchin shells. They find the remains of small birds and shellfish. The diet was narrow but steady. The people made the most of what they had. There is something striking in all of this, even when the trees were gone, even when the great statues stopped being raised. The people kept living, they kept gardening, they kept fishing from the shore, they kept feeding their children, The picture is not one of sudden ruin. It is one of careful adjustment. People learning to live within tighter and tighter walls of stone and wind and sea. This is why the older collapse story has been questioned so much in recent years. If the society had truly fallen apart, the gardens would tell us, the bones would tell us. Instead, the soil shows continuous use. The food remains show a population still organized, still working, still eating. One theory is that the people simply adapted, shrinking their ambitions in some ways while expanding their skills in others. Another view holds that conditions did grow harder, that lives became thinner and more difficult, even if they did not end. Both views may hold a piece of truth. The island is small. The margins are narrow. A bad year for rain, a season of strong storms, a slow change in the soil. Any of these could press on a population that already lived close to the edge. And yet the gardens kept being tended, the stones kept being moved, the fires kept being lit at evening. It is worth pausing on how remarkable this is. A handful of people on a speck of land surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean kept a society going for centuries. They did it with no metal tools, no outside trade, no way to send for help. Everything they needed had to come from the island itself, or from the sea around it, or from the careful memory of skills passed down from parent to child. What we still do not know is exactly how fragile that balance felt to the people living inside it. Did they sense the thinning of the soil? Did they worry about the trees? Did they speak of harder years to come? The bones and the gardens hinted survival. They do not tell us what survival cost. That part of the story remains held inside the quiet, weathered ground. Somewhere in the long history of Rapa Nui, the statues came down, not all at once, and not all of them, but over time, one by one, the great stone figures that had stood watch on their platforms began to fall. By the time outsiders mapped the island carefully in the 1800s, almost every moai on its ahu lay tipped on the ground. Many of them had fallen face down into the soft earth, with their long stern noses pressed into the soil and their broad backs turned up to the sky. It is one of the quietest and strangest sights in all of archaeology, and no one is entirely sure why it happened. The simplest old story is a story of conflict. In this version, the people of the island fell into hard times, and rival groups turned on one another. Each clan, the story goes, attacked the ancestors of the others. They pushed the moai forward off their platforms so the faces would strike the ground. In this telling, the toppling was a kind of unspeaking. To knock down a stone ancestor was to silence the mana, the quiet power that the statue carried for someone else's family. The picture is dramatic, and for a long time it shaped how the world imagined the island's later years. Second view is much gentler, and in recent decades it has gained ground. In this view, many of the falls were not violent at all. They were slow. The platforms settled. The soil shifted. Wind and rain worked at the bases over centuries. A statue tilted a little, then a little more, and one quiet night it lay down. Earthquakes may have helped. The island sits on a long volcanic ridge under the sea, and the ground there is not always still. Under this idea, the fallen moai are less a sign of anger and more a sign of time. A third possibility blends the two. Perhaps some statues were pushed in moments of grief or change, while others simply tired and leaned and fell. The pattern across the island is uneven. Some ahu show signs that look like deliberate damage. Stones placed under a statue's neck, for example, may have been set there to snap the head from the body when it came down. Other ahu show no such signs at all. The moai They seem to have lowered themselves into the grass, without any hand at their back. What makes this so hard to settle is that the toppling did not happen on a single day. It stretched across generations, possibly across centuries. Some statues were already down when European ships first arrived in the 1700s. Others were still standing then, and only fell later. Early visitors left short, sometimes confusing notes. They saw upright giants on one shore and fallen ones on another. They did not always say which. There is also the question of what the falling meant to the people themselves. Oral traditions on the island speak of a time of change, of old ways setting and new ways rising. The Birdman ceremony at the Cliffside village seems to have grown more important, even as the great Moai building slowed. Some researchers wonder whether the statues were not so much attacked as quietly retired. A culture's relationship with its ancestors can shift. A figure that once stood guard may, in a later age, be allowed to rest. And yet none of this fully closes the question. If the falls were natural, why do so many lie face forward, away from their platforms, as though pushed? If they were pushed, why do some sites show such careful, almost respectful placement of the fallen pieces? Why are the eyes, those bright discs of coral and stone, missing from nearly every one of them, scattered in fragments at the base of the platforms? Archaeologists today work patiently at these puzzles. They map the cracks. They study the angles of the falls. They look at the soil layers beneath each statue for hints of when the ground gave way. Some teams have lifted the great figures back upright, gently, as part of restoration. And in doing so, they read the marks left on the stone, like pages of a long book. Each ahu seems to tell its own version of the story. So the Moai lie there still, many of them, their faces in the earth. They have lain that way longer now than they ever stood. Whether they were pushed in sorrow, or laid down by time, or both at once across the slow centuries, the island has not yet said. The question waits with them in the grass, patient, unresolved, and quietly open to whoever comes next. Before the strangers came, before the statues fell, before the forest thinned and grew back as grass, the people of Rapa Nui were sailors. That much we know. The very fact of their presence on the island is proof. No one drifted there by accident. To reach that small green dot in the vast blue Pacific, someone had to read the sky, read the swells, read the flight paths of birds, and aim a small wooden boat across thousands of miles of open water. They arrived because they meant to arrive. And yet, by the time outsiders began to write things down, the great voyaging seemed to have stopped. The double-hulled canoes that crossed oceans were gone. The people stayed on the island and tended their gardens and carved their stones and watched the horizon. One question that quietly haunts the story is this: did the voyaging truly end, or did its memory simply slip beneath the surface of daily life, waiting? Some researchers wonder whether long voyages continued in small ways that left no clear trace. The Pacific is full of evidence that Polynesian sailors moved between islands in patterns we are still piecing together. Sweet potato, a plant native to South America, somehow reached islands across the Pacific long before European ships did. How it traveled remains an open question. One idea is that Polynesian voyagers reached the coast of South America and brought the plant home. Another is that the plant traveled some other way, perhaps by floating seeds, perhaps by routes we have not yet imagined. The evidence is thin and the debate is gentle and ongoing. If Rapa Nui sailors did reach the Americas, the island would not have been a final stop at the edge of the known world. It would have been a waypoint, a green resting place on a much longer thread of journeys. Some oral traditions hint at distant voyages, and returning travelers. But oral traditions are delicate things, shaped by generations of retelling, and historians treat them with care. Looking forward, the story of the island is still being written. The people of Rapa Nui are not a memory. They are a living community, descended from those who survived the dark centuries, who held on to their language and their songs and their connection to the carved ancestors on the slopes. Today, there are efforts to revive traditional navigation across Polynesia. Sailors are once again building double-hulled canoes and learning to read the stars without instruments. Some of these voyages have touched Rapa Nui, drawing a faint line between the island and the wider Pacific family it once belonged to. What the island will become in the next 100 years is uncertain. Soil is fragile. The climate is shifting. The sea is slowly rising, and some of the Ahu platforms sit close to the shore, where waves now reach during storms. Archaeologists wonder how many more secrets the ground still holds, and whether the ocean will reach some of them first. There are quiet conversations about how to protect the statues, and who gets to decide. These are questions for the living, not for the stones. Look further out, and the timescales become almost unimaginable. In 1,000,000 years, the volcanic rock of the island will have weathered into shapes we would not recognize. The soft tuff of Rano Raraku, where the Moai were carved, will have softened further, and the faces in the quarry will have blurred into the hillside. In 10 million years, the island itself may be gone. Rapa Nui sits on a slowly cooling hotspot, and like all volcanic islands, it is sinking, very gradually, back into the sea. The Pacific is full of underwater mountains that were once islands, their summits now dark and silent beneath the waves. In 100 million years, the continents will have rearranged themselves. The Pacific will be smaller, perhaps, and new lands will have risen. Whatever remains of Rapa Nui by then will lie in deep water, its statues coated in coral, its quarry forgotten. In 1 billion years, the sun will be slowly warming, and the oceans themselves will begin their long, slow change. The questions we ask now about collapse and survival and what really happened will have folded into something much older and much quieter. For now, the island is still here. The faces still face the land. The grass still grows over the fallen ones. And somewhere out on the water, in canoes shaped by hands that remember, the long voyages of the Pacific are slowly being learned again. What that means for the island's next chapter is one more open question to set gently beside the others. Step back now, as far as the mind can travel, and look at this small island from a great quiet distance. A green speck on a blue ocean, a wrinkle of volcanic rock barely above the waves. And on that wrinkle, the still faces of stone, looking out at nothing in particular, holding a question that the soil itself still seems to remember. The soil of Rapa Nui is not just dirt. It is volcanic ash that fell long before any human stood there. It is the slow rust of basalt breaking down under rain. It is the dust of seabird droppings carried inland by wind. It is the ground-up shells of tiny creatures that lived in the sea around the island and were lifted up by storms. Every handful holds a story far older than the carvings, and the stone itself is older still. The lava that built Rapa Nui rose from deep inside the earth, from the slow churn of the mantle far below the seafloor. That heat came from the slow decay of elements forged inside ancient stars, stars that lived and died long before our sun was born. The iron in the dark basalt, the calcium in the coral on the reef, the carbon in every palm that ever swayed in the island's wind. All of it was made in the furnaces of stars that had been gone for billions of years. The people who carved the Moai were made of the same stuff, Their bones held calcium from those long-dead stars. Their blood carried iron that once drifted as dust through empty space. Their breath moved oxygen that had been exhaled by tiny ocean plants millions of years before. They were, in a very real sense, the island looking at itself, stone shaped by hands that were themselves made of stone, made of sea, made of star. And the statues they carved were a kind of pause in the long drift of atoms. For a few hundred years, certain rocks on a certain island were arranged into faces. The faces watched the gardens. The gardens fed the people. The people remembered their ancestors. The ancestors became the statues. And the statues, slowly, are returning to soil. The lichen creeps. The rain softens the noses. The wind smooths the brows. In another 1,000 years, in 10,000 in a million, the Moai will be hills again, then dust, then ocean floor. This is not a sad thought. It is only the way of things. Mountains rise and mountains fall. Forests grow and forests vanish. Islands themselves are temporary, rising from volcanic fire and sinking again into the deep. Rapa Nui is young by geological standards, only a few 100,000 years old. One day it will slip below the waves, as countless islands have before it. The Pacific is full of drowned ancestors of islands, flat-topped seamounts that were once green and singing with birds. What the soil of Rapa Nui remembers, then, is not just the people. It remembers the palms before the people. It remembers the seafloor before the lava. It remembers, in the patient way that matter remembers, every form it has ever taken. And the people who walked there, who carved there, who wandered there, are part of that long memory now. There. Atoms have not gone anywhere. They are in the grass. They are in the gulls. They are in the salt on the lips of fishermen still living there today. The mystery of what happened to them sits inside this much bigger picture. A small story inside a vast and patient one. We do not fully know why the population fell. We do not fully know why the statues stopped. We do not fully know what was lost and what was carried forward, but we know that the question itself is a kind of inheritance. Each generation gets to ask it again. Each generation gets to look at the faces and wonder. And so do you, lying there in the soft dark, listening. You are made of the same ancient material as the island. The same calcium in your bones once moved through the body of a creature that lived in a sea that does not exist anymore. The same water in you has been rain, has been river, has been cloud, has been ocean 100 million times. You are, in your quiet way, a Moai too, a shape briefly held, a face briefly turned toward the world, a question that the universe is asking itself for a little while before it asks something else. The soil remembers, the stars remember, the stones remember, and tonight, gently, so do you. And so we come to the end of our long, slow walk around the island of giants. We have stood at the foot of the Moai. We have followed the dirt roads that lead away from the quarry. We have watched the red topknots roll across the grass, and the white coral eyes catch the light, and the seabirds turn in the wind above the cliffs. We have listened to the soft hum of an island that once carried thousands of people and hundreds of stone faces beneath the same patient sky. Through all of it, one question has stayed with us. What really happened to the people of Rapa Nui? The old story said the island ate itself, that the forests fell and the soil thinned, and the people fought until little was left. The newer story says the people were clever and steady, that they adapted to a hard land, and that the deepest wounds came later, from sails on the horizon and sicknesses they could not fight. But truth most likely lives somewhere in between, in a place where many small pressures gathered slowly across many quiet years. We do not have to choose tonight. The question is allowed to stay open. The island has kept its silence for a long time, and the soil is still giving up its secrets one careful spoonful at a time. Each year, new pollen grains are counted. New bones are studied with gentle hands. New oral histories are written down. The picture grows clearer, then blurs, then sharpens again in a different shape. That is how patient knowledge grows. Imagine the island now, in this moment, as you rest. The day has ended there. The sun has slipped into the wide ocean, and the sky has gone soft and pink, and then deep blue. The Moai stand along the coast, their long shadows fading into the grass. The waves move against the black rocks in a slow, even rhythm. Somewhere, a seabird settles into a low nest. Somewhere, a child sleeps in a warm house. The island breathes, and around the island, the great Pacific stretches in every direction, dark and gentle, holding the small green speck the way a palm holds a seed. The moon climbs above the water. Its light spreads in a long silver line across the swell. The same moon shines on the quarry, where the unfinished giants lean in the soft grass, half asleep themselves. The same moon shines on the platforms, where the finished giants face inland, watching over the quiet land. The same moon shines on you, wherever you are resting tonight. Our planet turns slowly in the dark. The oceans rock against the shores. The clouds drift in slow rivers across the sky. The deserts cool. The forests breathe out. The glaciers creak softly in their long, slow sleep. And on one small island in the middle of the largest ocean, the stone faces keep their watch. The way they have kept it for hundreds of years. The way they may keep it for hundreds more. There is something kind in a mystery that does not need to be solved tonight. It means there is still wonder waiting in the world. It means there are still questions worth carrying into the morning. It means the people who lived and laughed and worked on that island still have stories to tell us, if we listen carefully and stay humble in front of what we do not yet know. So let the question rest where it belongs, out on the dark water, under the moon, among the stone ancestors. We may learn more in our lifetime, we may not. Some answers may arrive in the next dig, in the next study, in the next careful conversation with the Rapa Nui people themselves. Some may only ever be guessed at. Both outcomes are part of being alive on a planet that is older and stranger than any of us. For tonight, it is enough to have wandered. It is enough to have walked with the giants for a while. It is enough to know that somewhere, right now, an ocean is breathing, a moon is rising, and a row of patient stone faces is keeping the slow company of the stars. Rest now. The island is safe in its silence. The earth is safe in its turning. The question is safe in the soil, waiting for whoever comes next with a kind heart and a careful hand. You have nothing to solve and nothing to carry. You only have to let your breathing soften and let the long, slow sound of the sea move through you, and let your thoughts drift like clouds across a quiet evening sky. Subscribe for a brand new Earth topic every night. One tap and something wonderful is waiting for you tomorrow. Sweet dreams.